Hello, everyone, and welcome to the talk on Learning Physiology Well, Best Practices by Professor Linda Constanzo. My name is Dr. Raja Elena from University of Malaya, and I'm pleased to be the moderator for today's event. This event is organized by Department of Physiology, University of Malaya, and the Society for Physiology, or TSFP. For those of you who are not familiar with TSFP, we are a locally established society that focuses on exploring and consolidating efforts in promoting transfer of knowledge and skills in teaching and learning of physiology. We welcome new members to join us in this quest. If you're interested, do check out our website at tsfpmalaysia.com. There is a general perception that physiology is difficult to learn. Some students say that they know physiology is relevant for their clinical practice, but they just don't know how to master this subject. Well, in this talk, Professor Costanzo will unravel the uniqueness of physiology discipline and some insights on best practices for learning physiology well. Before I begin, I would like to share just a few housekeeping notes for all of us to help us get the most of this webinar today with minimal disruption. Please take note that this presentation is being recorded. There's a large number of participants registering for this meeting, so we are doing a live broadcasting of this event on YouTube to reach as many people as possible. And in the event that any of your colleagues are not able to join the meeting, please direct them to the YouTube link shown previously, or it's also pasted in the chat box. Please ensure that your microphone is muted at all times throughout the session to avoid disruption. Please check that you have the correct audio setting and able to see the slides being projected. And last but not least, there will be a short question and answer session at the end of the session. However, in view of the large audience today, we request that you direct any questions to the speaker through the chat option at the bottom of your screen, rather than speaking directly through the microphone. This is to ensure a smoother running of the session. Your cooperation in this regard is highly appreciated. Now, it is a great pleasure for me to introduce our distinguished speaker for today. She is currently a professor of physiology and biophysics and a special assistant to the Dean of Medicine and student liaison at Virginia Commonwealth University School of Medicine, USA. I believe that she has been on the faculty of VCU for 40 years now. After graduating from Duke University and the State University of New York, she did her postdoctoral training in renal physiology at Cornell Medical College. She continues her expertise in renal physiology, and her research on the renal handling of calcium was funded by the National Institute of Health and the American Heart Association. Being passionate about teaching as well as leading and supporting faculty members in their roles in teaching, she has held several roles at VCU. Several administrative roles at VCU, including longtime course director of medical physiology and assistant dean for preclinical medical education. Having a vast teaching experience and an excellent repertoire, she has received recognition for her teaching on 75 occasions, including annual Best Professor Awards, VCU's Teacher of the Year in 1992, the first annual Physiology Teacher of the Year for the American Physiological Society in 1993, the first annual School of Medicine Teaching Excellence Award in 1999, and AAMC/AOA Robert J. Glasser Distinguished Teacher Award in 2004. Part of the reason why we are having such a big crowd today is because she's recognized internationally as a prolific author of medical textbooks, and her textbooks are being used all over the world. I'm sure the audience cannot wait to hear her insight on the best practices for learning physiology well. With that, I would like to officially welcome our wonderful speaker for today, Professor Linda Constanzo. Professor Constanzo, the Zoom floor is yours whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Dr. Alina. Thank you so much. That was such a nice introduction, and I am so thrilled to be here. I'm going to share my screen. And of course, you see all my slides in reverse because I didn't go to the beginning. All right. Is that visible, Dr. Alina?
Yes, Prof, it is.
Okay, good. Well, I'm delighted to be here today. It's been such a wonderful invitation. I've been so excited. I could hardly contain myself to get to Friday night it's Friday night in Virginia. It's Saturday morning in Malaysia. So you already know, this is me. I'm a professor of physiology and biophysics long-term at Virginia Commonwealth University School of Medicine. I guess I went there as after my postdoc. We loved it in Virginia and we stayed. So that's the short story. Today, we'll be reaching across the oceans and just really clasping hands with those of you at the University of Malaya. I'm so eager to hear your thoughts and questions and hear maybe a little bit about your experiences. I know Dr. Alina has shared will share my email address with you. So even after the talk, I would love to hear from you and hear about your experiences. Thank you, Dr. Alina and Professor Chang, who I've known for many years. Wonderful, wonderful educators for thinking of me and for inviting me here today and making this possible. So those are my virtual flowers to you in lieu of an in-person. How's that? I thought you might enjoy seeing a scene of downtown Richmond, Virginia, where the Virginia Commonwealth University School of Medicine is located. It's a very large medical school, a large hospital that's collectively called VCU Health, or I should say hospitals. It's one of I think it's the largest tertiary care medical school and hospital in Virginia, the other being at University of Virginia down the road in Charlottesville. So we're in Richmond, Virginia. And as you can see, it's an urban campus, and there's the highway you can see going by. So it's right downtown and very, very busy, right off of 95, if you're familiar with the geography there at all. These photos are of the original Medical College of Virginia, it used to be called, founded in 1838. It is the oldest medical school in the South. This original medical school building with the Egyptian architecture was actually, the construction was finished in 1845. The entire medical school was housed in the building that you see in the photograph, this Egyptian building. The medical school stayed open during the Civil War. It was the only school in the South that did stay open and trained physicians who served in the Civil War. The building, which has been renovated several times since, is still in operation, and we still teach medical students in this building, although you can imagine we have some newer structures as well. You see on the photo on the right, we actually do get snow in Virginia. If you're ever visiting, make sure you come in January. That's the most likely time to find snow. So today, I thought it might be good to just post the order of topics that I'm going to cover, so you know, to kind of know where we're heading. I had sent Dr. Alina and Professor Chang an outline. Talk a little bit about what's different about physiology than learning other subjects, best practices, whether to use a book or not, and what the value might be, how to write write, practice writing. Apparently that's very effective for making things stick. Talk a little bit about sequential thinking, what I call order of events. It's the best way to really lock that physiology into your brain. I'm going to talk about self-quizzing, which is and how does it work? I'm going to talk about the forgetting, which is a good thing. That's always a shocker. And how you own the material for life, and then talk about some test taking, which everyone is, I'm sure, interested in, better test taking. So this fella, when he heard that physiology is different, he was excited. So he represents, this little fellow represents a fraction, a portion of the medical students who, when they hear that physiology is going to be different than the other classes, are excited to hear that news, because they perhaps weren't such good memorizers and so forth. And anyway, they were glad to hear that there was this big understanding subject coming up. Other students, are maybe a little bit, as Dr. Alina was alluding to, a little bit more afraid. It's like, I've heard physiology is tough. But anyway, this guy is excited, so we like that. For one, I think the reason that physiology kind of gets everybody's attention, especially the first time you take it in your medical studies, is that you feel like the stakes might be higher. First of all, you're told that physiology is the basis for pathophysiology. That sounds important. Many people will tell you, and I'm one of them that happens to believe this, that it's the basis for medicine. Some will even say for all of medicine. And you're maybe as a student a little bit skeptical about that. You say, yeah, they told us that in anatomy, they told us that in biochemistry. But when we get to physiology, we say, yeah, but we really mean it. And finally, physiology is an essential component of all of the exams, of the integrated exams that you take and your barrier exams. So obviously, it's a biggie. I thought that I might share just a little bit of my personal philosophy on this topic of why is physiology so critical, and how sort of the undergirding of everything that I teach our medical students. First of all, as I said, I truly believe that it is the foundation of medicine. Physiology is the why. Physiology is, how does it work? How does the body work? And undeniably, you have to know that. You have to understand that. Physiology cannot be memorized. Of course, there are always going to be facts that you have to commit to memory. But for the most part, physiology is all about the understanding. And that's, going to be really good news for a lot of people, because if you can understand it, you own it. And I'm going to talk a lot today about owning it, because once you get it, you might need to refresh from time to time, but they really, you really aren't going to lose it if you truly understand the logic of the physiology. And so if you can continue to practice the principles of physiology and apply them over and over again, and we'll talk about examples of that, that's how, in the end, you really own this important subject. So that's my personal philosophy. I tell my students, sorry, I'm hitting this thing and it's jumping all over the place. Always think physiologically. If you can carry that forward into your clinical years, you are going to be a great doctor, and you're going to be a great teacher, both of the students who come behind you and your patients. So a few more thoughts about why physiology is different. As I already said this, but it can't be memorized. And one of the issues for some students is that when you get to this point in your medical education, you have become often very good memorizers. Just the nature of the volume of the material you've had to memorize. And so it can be a little bit of a shock to find out that physiology is different, and you're not going to be able to memorize your way through it, not successfully. Secondly, understanding physiology can't be rushed. It's a process, and often you'll invest a lot of time up front to get that understanding, but the payoff is big because once you own it, you really don't have to invest a whole lot more time in it. You're going to be applying it and using it in questions and all that sort of thing. But the big investment is probably in the beginning when you can't be rushed. You have to really understand it. It's concepts, it's principles, that's not isolated facts. And it's a heavy emphasis on interconnections and recurring themes. And all of that really enriches the process of learning and understanding physiology, those interconnections. But again, maybe a big investment in the beginning. This subject of graphs, equations, and calculations. The upperclassmen have maybe mentioned this to you, or maybe you are an upperclassman already, and so already know about this, but physiology is heavy with graphs. It is inescapable, the equations and the calculations and the math part. So what I say and advise my students always, and I usually do this day one of our course, is that you have to make peace with the graphs and the equations and the calculations. They're not going away. And so the best thing to do is just suspend your fears, put them on the back burner, kind of let go of maybe some prior experiences that you had with graphs and equations and so forth, and give it a shot, give it a new, fresh look, because you might be surprised that some of that physics, for example, that seemed so remote or hard to apply, when you apply it in the body, it is suddenly reveals to you some concepts that really are quite intuitive. So graphs and equations and calculations are the language of physiology. I always kind of, I kind of tease our students sometimes. I say, so you don't do graphs, like you don't do windows. And they'll laugh and say, yeah, that's me. The secret, and we'll talk a bit about this more, is to translate into something intuitive. So anytime you can translate a graph or an equation into something that's intuitive, that really speaks to you, then it's not so daunting. So highly, highly recommend, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay, best practices. This is the cycle that I think works best when you're learning physiology. So for those of you who are embarking on your medical school physiology, and I know you have an integrated curriculum. We have an integrated curriculum too, so I know exactly what you're going through. There's a physiology component to each system. This is the cycle I think that works best. I always advise pre-reading before lecture, and the pre-read, the purpose of the pre-read is to warm the circuits. It's to get some of the big ideas, to get the main points, to sort of see how the topic is organized, not to go in a lot of depth, not to go into a lot of detail, not to overwhelm yourself, but just to get the lay of the land and to see kind of what it's generally about. And by warming the circuits with a pre-read, and we can talk a little bit about what the source of that pre-read might be, then when you go to class, I should use the little pointer, hold on. Then when you go to class, you already have a general idea of what's going on. You can listen and learn a lot more attentively rather than being lost. And you already have an idea of where the sticking points might be and where you might have some difficulty because you've already pre-read a little bit. So generally then class time is learning time because you've already warmed the circuits. Then after attending class, do some review that day, which would include, I think, pretty early, doing some practice questions. Often students will think they need to wait on practice questions until they really know a lot of stuff. I gotta wait. I gotta wait till I know everything. I don't wanna miss a practice question. And I think you're missing an opportunity when you do that, because practice questions are actually a great way to learn. All you have to do is suspend your concern about missing something. They're for practice. They're called practice. That means they don't count. It's just between you and the practice questions. And so I think doing practice questions early, and in physiology, you can do them again, maybe closer to your exams, because you really can't wear out a question in physiology. It doesn't really matter if you've seen the answer. The issue is, can you think it through correctly? It's all about the thinking and all about the understanding. So this is the cycle, and you repeat. And each day you sort of repeat the same cycle. Just going back to pre-reading for a second, pre-reading is usually, I think, done in the evening, and it should be brief. The number one reason that the pre-reading habit fails is that students pre-read from something that's too lengthy or too in-depth, and after a couple of days of doing that, they just give up. It's too hard and it takes too much time. So you need a pretty short source for your pre-read. Sometimes a book can act, if it's a didactic book, can be a good source for your pre-read, or you can glance through the notes of the upcoming lecture if you have the PowerPoint that you can look at. So identifying a good appropriate pre-read is really one of the secrets to this cycle. The question arises whether to use a book or not. Well, you're probably not surprised to hear that I'm a fan of books. So I think books are just a very efficient way to, if it's a didactic book, to really get a whole lot of understanding and pretty quickly. But here are some of the issues, and you know, of course, make your own decision of whether books are for you. Book can be the source for your pre-read if it's the appropriate level. It can be just the right source. Books can tell, and I think this is probably one of the big virtues that students find, is that a book can tell the same story in a different voice, and that voice may speak to you, and and that connection can be what makes a difference. So it may seem counterintuitive that you want to hear the same or read the same story from a different voice. The counterintuitive is that wouldn't it be better to just hear the same professor explaining it again the same way? And I think there is of course, some virtue in that. But sometimes I think the brain actually functions at a higher level when you hear about the same concept from a slightly different voice, a slightly different angle. It actually can make that concept cement even better. So something to try, something to consider. Books show you the hierarchy of concepts because they are often they should be organized in a very streamlined and nice, neat way, and the hierarchy is visible, and that can be very helpful. Books tell a cohesive story. And that often is something that students can miss with lectures, because there's no way that a lecture can tell a continuous story. By definition, a lecture has to be a little bit more fragmented. Books fill in gaps. They can help with difficult topics. They can give you extra practice questions. And finally, if you find a book that you like, they really are, can be that best friend that stands by you in difficult times, and the source that you can reliably go back to. So those are some of the points that come to mind. A lot of students, and I would imagine a lot of you here today, have experienced this. When you write something, it seems to stick better. The process of writing, and students have told me, makes my brain work better. And I 100% agree with that, although I don't pretend to understand why it's true. I think a lot of us have experienced that phenomenon. And so the question is, what can you write for physiology? What sorts of things can you write? And let me just moving my little thing out of the way. Yeah, there we go. So I'm going to start with a don't. What not to write. This is the don't. It's the first thing that for me comes to mind. And why is it the first thing that comes to mind? because our students in Virginia who come out of undergraduate school to medical school, so many of them have in undergraduate school, the college experience, have adopted this copying the notes kind of habit. And because, undergraduate studies are just not as intense as medical studies, the schedule is not as compact, there's time for things like that. So they've had this habit, and sometimes it's a lifelong habit, of copying the notes, which literally means taking, PowerPoint slides and literally copying them over onto a piece of paper or a tablet or something like that. And so I know about this, and the reason it's my, it's my number one don't is that it's a habit that has to be broken. It's never going to work in medical school. It's passive. It's a waste of time. Passive by definition is it's not active. You're not actively thinking. You're not actively learning. And the biggest, and one of the biggest problems is that it's consuming so much time to copy those notes. I've had students tell me that they copied all the notes, meaning they copied all the slides, and they never even had time to look at what they copied, which means they certainly didn't have time to digest the material, to think about the material, to practice questions. So the number one don't is to kick the copying habit, give it up, and you're going to replace it with other kinds of writing. That's the point. So writing is good, writing is great, and writing should be active. What are some of the things that for physiology are really effective, active writing? And I say here at the top, the only limit to active writing is your own imagination. There is no limit, actually. You can come up with incredibly innovative and exciting things to write that will propel your understanding of physiology forward. So the sky's the limit. All you need is literally a stack of scratch paper and a pen or a pencil, or of course an electronic tablet. Fabulous. I know a lot of students who use a tablet but don't type. They don't type on the tablet. They actually, use the electronic pen or Apple Pencil or whatever the device is, so that they can simulate the writing experience. So here are some ideas. But again, the limit is only your imagination. I'm going to talk a lot about order of events. And by order of events, I mean the sequence that things occur in, and these are physiologic concepts. Get a blank piece of paper and start writing. There's a decrease in arterial pressure. What are all the things that follow from that? And you just start writing, and you start writing, and you may even make some mistakes, especially if you're not looking at anything and you're trying to do it from memory. No problem. Just do the best you can, and then compare what you've written back to the book or your notes. But you're practicing, and you're seeing that order of events, the sequential thinking, and that's the beginning of owning the material that we're going to be talking about a lot. Making your own charts is an awesome thing to write. And once you become a charter, I have a student who said she could chart anything, which really, I didn't believe her. I thought that there must be some things that you can't make into a chart, but she was incredibly creative. But charts are great. If you get a blank piece of paper, turn it sideways, come up with what the headings should be, and then just start kind of constructing those charts. You could do, I just listed some examples here, that's some things I thought of. The nephron, because it's got a bunch of different parts, and those parts have different functions. They have different diuretics that work, and all kinds of different features. VQ defects in the lungs, you could make a great chart of that. Autonomics, all the autonomic effects of the organ systems and the receptors. The cardiac ion channels and their functions. Endocrine disorders make great charts. GI hormones, GI secretions. The list is endless. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. So, the practice makes perfect, but, charts are just a fabulous way of comparing and contrasting, and charts, become that visual that's so effective. I am a believer in making your own charts, perhaps with the guidance of something that you've seen in a book, but really kind of starting from scratch and doing your own. Redrawing graphs, especially classic graphs. The key here when you redraw graphs in your writing is that you talk through the graph as you go, which demystifies the whole graph process. You got to be able to talk it through as if you're teaching somebody else. And so there's, all kinds of classic graphs that are worth redrawing and talking through, and maybe pair teaching with another student. Frank Starling curve, pressure volume loops in the heart and the ventricle, lung compliance curves. Sorry about that. Lung compliance curves, they're endless classic graphs that would be worth redrawing. But again, you want to be kind of selective here. You don't want to be just copying for the sake of copying. It's got to have the graphs should be high value graphs, and they should be graphs that you need to talk through. And then, hey, practice questions are a kind of writing. And so get that big stack of paper, blank paper, and do as many practice questions as you can, applying the knowledge that you have. So I say practice questions, yeah, they are your best, your BFFs. So I want to go back to this order of events thing, because I think that's really the secret to physiology is to own it. How do you own it? You own it by being able to think through what happens first, what happens next, follow the logic, and accurately predict what will happen in a sequence of events. And I'm going to give you an example in a second. If you can do that, you don't have to memorize all of those individual steps. You just think through those steps in the order that they occur, and it's yours. You might, as I said earlier, you might have to tune it up a little bit. You might have to refresh, but the concepts are yours. So here's an example of order of events, and I picked something from kidney, but there are hundreds and hundreds of examples that you could use, but here's one. So I picked nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. And nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, if you've already had your renal block, is a disorder in the kidney where there is a defect in the signaling pathway for ADH in the collecting duct principal cells. So there can be a defect in the receptor, in the G protein, in the adenyl cyclase, even downstream from the adenyl cyclase, downstream from cyclic AMP, which is the second messenger. So there can be any number of defects in the signaling pathway that cause so-called nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. The bottom line is that you have ADH, but it can't act because of this defect. So what the first thing you do when you're doing order of events is you clearly identify what the initial problem is. In other words, what happened first. And that is that ADH can't act. And that's the problem with nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. Now, I want to divert off for a second before I take you through the order of events. And that is, you could look at a table somewhere that shows you all the things that happen in nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. What happens to the collecting ducts? What happens to water reabsorption? What happens to urine osmolarity? What happens to plasma osmolarity? What happens to ADH levels? And you could look at that list and you could try to memorize it. Now, of course, what's going to happen is that you might successfully memorize it for about 5 minutes. But the minute that that you move on to something else, all those little factoids that you memorized about nephrogenic diabetes insipidus are gone from your brain, and you got to start all over again. So it's very ineffective to try and memorize something like this. And so what is order of events? Well, we start with what happens first, and you get that blank piece of paper and you just predict. ADH can't act. That's what happened first. What happened next? The collecting ducts can't reabsorb water. What happened next? Because the collecting ducts can't reabsorb water, excess water was excreted. So in nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, you will always have a decreased urine osmolarity, low urine osmolarity. What happened next? Because you were excreting so much water out of the body, too much water, what happened next is that the body fluids, including the plasma osmolarity, got concentrated. And so you would expect an increase in plasma osmolarity. You're always going to see that in nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, especially in an exam question. And then what happened next? That increase in plasma osmolarity turned on ADH secretion from the posterior pituitary. So in nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, you're always going to have high ADH levels. So the order of events system is 100% reliable if you can predict accurately what happened, what happened first, what happened next, what happened next, what happened next, what happened next. You own it. You never have to memorize that list of stuff again about nephrogenic DI. In fact, why would you? Because you can quickly jot it down, predict what would happen, check yourself, and you're good. You're good to go. So every concept in physiology, you can think of an order of events. And I would recommend that you apply this every time you can. Absolutely. Apply it whenever you can. And you are going to be so much happier as a student doing it this way than trying to memorize this collection of facts. Self-quizzing. So self-quizzing, I learned a lot about this from the book Make It Stick, which I highly recommend. I can send it to Dr. Alina, the reference. It's actually a wonderful book about long-term learning, and a lot of examples from medical students, so be very relevant. So anyway, in the book, they talk a lot about the power of self-quizzing, which is active review. And as I have become a fan of this self-quizzing and try to convince my students to use it as much as they can, I myself have started making it a daily habit. So how does self-quizzing work? Well, this is the owl is telling us that this is a very wise thing to do. First of all, self-quizzing requires absolutely no tools except you and your good old brain. You don't even need a paper or a tablet or a pencil for this, because you can do it just thinking. So what does that mean? So self-quizzing is, it's very active. What you're doing is you're retrieving from memory and using visual and mental rehearsals to retrieve from memory. So you can apply self-quizzing. Let's say you're at the gym later today, okay? And you decided to try this just to see what happens. So you're at the gym and you're on the treadmill and you're like, I'm going to try this self-quizzing. I don't need it. She says, I don't need anything but my good old brain. So I'm going to try to remember what I studied yesterday. Or what did I learn yesterday? Can I remember 5 things that I learned yesterday? Okay, that went pretty well. Can I remember anything that I learned last week or 2 weeks ago in this course? And you come up with a few things. And the more you think about it, maybe the more things that come to mind. Or 2 days ago, sorry. And then you go, so what about last week? Or 2 weeks ago. So you get the idea. And what you're looking for are key, what were some of the key ideas? What was most important about what we had in class yesterday? What was new to me, this is an interesting one, because when you identify things that are new, they sort of get highlighted in a special way in your brain. And, there's another kind of interesting connection there, and that is, can I connect those new ideas to things I already knew? And you are making some very strong synapses and synaptic pathways when you do this kind of thing. So I would challenge everybody who's here today to try this, because the more you try it, the more you see how effective it can be. It's fun. There's nobody knows you're doing it, because you're just thinking and you're visualizing and you're, this visual and mental rehearsal kind of thing. And just like with the active writing, the more you do it, the better you get at it. And I think you're going to find that it is incredibly effective. The one thing that you have to kind of suspend, again, I've said this, I think, in another context, and that is that you have to stop worrying about, forgetting or not, I couldn't remember that much, the self-judgment kind of things. Get rid of that. It's all about the positive. And so I would challenge you later this evening, see if you can remember 2 or 3 things from this talk today, for example. That might be one place to start. Okay, very counterintuitive idea. And that is that forgetting is good. So the first time that students hear this, and I talk with my students in Virginia a lot about this, the first time I tell them this, they basically think I've lost my mind. That you've spent your whole academic career hating to forget, right? Every time you forget something or miss a question on an exam, that is, you consider a bad thing. And so it really requires a whole new way of thinking. So here is the point. And this is proven science, neurobiology, that actually what you want to do is that you want to forget. You want to have some forgetting built into your review. So, for example, you would intentionally space your self-quizzing sessions. So if you did one of those self-quizzing little exercises on the material from yesterday that you had in class, you might want to wait a few days and try it again, intentionally allowing some forgetting to occur. Can you believe that? You're actually doing that intentionally. And that decay strengthens long-term learning, which is what this is all about. You want long-term learning. That long-term learning in the hippocampus is the strong synapses. And it turns out that long-term learning is proportional to the effort you have to put into it. This is a bombshell idea, but I think that there's absolutely enough science to support this now. And so what you're doing when you intentionally allow forgetting to occur is that you're going to make it harder to retrieve that information. But that extra effort that it takes for the retrieval, that is what is proportional to the long-term learning and the effectiveness of the long-term learning. So again, what you're doing is spacing your self-quizzing sessions, those things that you do when you go to the gym, or you're just going for a walk, or you're, having breakfast. Allow some forgetting to occur intentionally, so there will be some decay, so that it will take more effort to retrieve it the next time you try to recall. And that will strengthen ultimately the long-term learning. This takes a little bit of courage. It takes a little bit of courage to try it. It goes against kind of this gut feeling that forgetting is bad. But once you see how much more effective it is, and you might have experienced, I suspect some of you or many of you have experienced this already, that something that took more effort, that seemed harder, actually ended up staying with you much better. So perhaps you've already experienced this phenomenon, and it's real. Okay, finally, test taking. Yeah, I want to know all the tricks. Sign me up, he said. What I'm mainly talking, I'd say I'm exclusively talking about multiple choice test taking, because I think that's what all of you do a lot of. You may also have essay exams and so forth, but what I'm going to talk about applies to the multiple choice test. And these are the tried and true. First of all, you got to sleep the night before the exam. Now I know that sleep can be restless the night before the exam. You might not get the best night's sleep, but what I'm recommending here or saying here is that what you don't want to do is, especially, oh my gosh, so critical before a physiology exam when you need to be able to think, is to intentionally stay up all night, thinking that you can pack in a few more little factoids or something, and somehow that's going to translate on the exam to better results. What's going to happen is that your brain is not going to function as well. You're not going to be able to think as accurately. You're going to think more slowly on the exam. So please get sleep and don't intentionally stay up all night. It doesn't work. When you're in the test, this is going to sound perhaps so obvious. Read the question carefully. And the question is called, there's the stem, which is the body of the question, and that usually ends with, the stem ends with the question that's being asked. Read the question carefully. Believe it or not, I mean, you probably do believe this because you probably have done it. The most common test taking error among medical students is not answering the question that was asked. I spend, I don't know how many hours a week going over exams with students. We allow them to review their exams, and sometimes we go over them with them. And the most common thing I'll hear when I'm reviewing an exam with a student who's missed a bunch of stuff is, oh, I read that differently. Oh, I answered a different question. So you got to read carefully and make sure you know what's being asked. The next thing is to identify the topic of the question. Every question has a topic. Every question has a home. If the question is about the the left ventricular pressure volume loop, what's the effect of an increase in preload or something like that, you've got to go to the right place in your brain, which is the ventricular pressure volume loop. If you go to some other place in your brain, then like the baroreceptor mechanism, then you're going to be way off. So it is 100% worth it to spend a second identifying the topic and going to the right place in your brain. And then, I don't know whether you're familiar with this term or not, but it's something that we talk about, the cover-up technique. And this is how I advise students to take multiple choice questions whenever possible. And that is that you cover up the answer choices. So you read the stem, you read the question, you identify the topic of the question, and then you cover up the answer choices. You may glance at the choices just to see kind of what, general area they're in, but then cover them up and do the thinking yourself. And if you're allowed to have scratch paper, think through the order of events, even jot down a couple of key points if you're allowed to do that, and come up with your own answer. And that's the cleanest way to work a multiple choice question accurately. And then match up your thinking, your answer with the best answer choice. Next question, move on. You don't have to analyze each of the other answer choices. If you identify the correct one, as I say to my students, you can't get any righter than right. If that answer is right, how can you get any righter than that? And I'm going to come to the distractors in a minute, but you want, when you're taking an actual exam, if you found the right answer, mark it and move on. These are the don'ts for test taking, and these apply especially to physiology questions. If you don't read the question too fast, I already touched on that, because you may end up answering the wrong question, or you may miss an important word such as because. the kind of word that can change the question. If the question asks you because, then they're asking for the why, the mechanism. So can't read too fast. Don't be distracted by the distractors. And the distractors are the wrong answers. That's it's a wicked term, isn't it? But that's what the wrong answers are called. They're the distractors. They're meant to intentionally distract you. So you are a wise student, you're not going to be distracted by the distractors. So I think if you've matched up your thinking, your good thinking with the best answer choice, then you really don't have to analyze each and every one of those distractors, because what's going to happen when you start diving into those distractors, you are going to find all kinds of ideas that pop into your head. Like, what about that? What about that? If I twist that around like 180 degrees, I could make that distractor correct. I bet you're identifying with this, because these are the common things that happen. And you're burning the clock, using up time that you need for the rest of the exam. And you have a very high likelihood of being pulled into one of those distractors that you've somehow forgotten about the right answer that was righter than right. And now you're being pulled into a distractor. So don't be distracted. Don't overthink. It's kind of silly maybe to say, but think just enough. You want to think enough to come to a clear right answer, but you don't want to go beyond that. There's no need to go beyond that, because if you overthink, then you're going to start coming up with scenarios that the question didn't ask about, but you are going to start twisting things around, and that's often how you end up making mistakes on exams. Please don't smile at this, but I wrote this down because it happens so often. Don't reconsider your career choice while taking tests. And I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but suddenly your mind starts wandering to, really, should I be doing this? Is this really for me? Am I up to this? All of this kind of thing while you're taking a test. I don't know in Malaysia if you do this, but in Virginia, this is one of the most common test taking, I think, things that happens. And I often have to work with students quite a bit to get them to stop doing this. I say, if you want to think about your career choice, how about we do that after the exam, or maybe after the course is over would be a better time to do it. So that actually is a serious don't. I wasn't being facetious. And the final thing on the list of don'ts is that you don't change answers impulsively. Don't go back and say, oh, whoops, that other choice suddenly looks good. Let me mark that and switch it, because most of the time the statistics are going to be very much against you, that this is not going to work out. You're usually going to be changing a right answer to a wrong answer. So the rule for changing answers is that if you can think through a question as thoroughly and as carefully and accurately as you did the first time, and you truly come to a different conclusion, a different answer, then you might be justified in changing it, but nothing impulsive. So those are best wishes from VCU, from all of us in Richmond, Virginia. I wish you all the best. And I know that Dr. Alina has been looking at the chat and is maybe going to pass along some questions. So I would be just delighted to answer. And I'm going to actually stop sharing so I can see you. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Prof Costanzo, for the really great talk and an insightful perspective on this topic. I'm sure the audience find it very intriguing and valuable. And I think I agree with you in the sense that that physiology cannot be memorized, and it takes time to actually master this subject. And I also advise students really to do active recall and active writing. But a lot of students essentially say that they are just, they don't have so much time to actually do all this spaced repetition that you mentioned. So I think the key point here is to actually relay the message to the students that it takes time, and you do actually have to put a lot of efforts in so that it stays in your long-term memory, if that's the point that we want to get across. So I'm actually seeing the chat buttons, and I'm just going to read through a few questions here because it suddenly comes up. A lot of people are excited. They're saying thank you very much. And in terms of questions, there is a question as to what is your suggestions about where to find practice questions? If you can, is it online, or maybe is it available in books that's actually being sold?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, that's a great question, Dr. Alina. Thank you for passing that on. I always say to start with the practice questions provided by your professors. But students always want more. No matter how many practice questions, they always want more. The BRS review books have multiple choice practice questions with explained answers. I love the UWorld question bank. If you all know about this, UWorld.
Not very familiar, but I think
okay,
we're going to check it out after this.
Check it out. It is it's considered to be the best comprehensive preclinical question bank. And it's a question bank for step 1, which we take in the United States from the licensing exam. But the questions are very well done. They are challenging. They have great explanations. You will learn so much. So the appropriate bank would be UWorld for step 1. And they have a lot of physiology, a lot of pathophysiology. They're, I think, between 3,500 and 4,000 questions, and you buy a year subscription. But I think it's really worth it because of the quality. And they really have, in the United States now, much more favored than some of the other banks that were around. So it's an electronic bank. Okay. And so I think that's great. This is not for physiology, but the Robbins Review of Pathology, are you all familiar with that? Now, this would be, of course, pathology questions, but the Robbins Review of Pathology is an all question and explained answer book. And there is, I can send you, Dr. Alina, I can send you the specific names that you can pass along. But there is a web path online, which is the Robbins People, and it is an image bank and question bank. But again, those are all pathology questions too. So I'm kind of going a little beyond physiology, but I think probably students are interested in all of those areas. The physio question bank, is that good?
Yeah, wonderful. So there's also questions about what's the best way to build a physiology question bank. I'm not sure whether it's in perspective of the educator or actually students. So for students, perhaps, yeah, how do they actually compile all of these? Are they compiling through your past years, or what would be the best way to actually create a question bank for yourself? Is there any thoughts on your side on this?
So I don't know if the question is to write questions, you mean, or themselves, or
probably both, I think, in sense of actually creating a bank for themselves so that they can practice on the questions.
Yeah. I mean, I think in the interest of time, efficiency, it's probably best to use questions that are already out there that are well regarded. Like the, either the BRS books, which, are physical books, or the UWorld question bank is really excellent. And is probably worth the investment of, for getting a year subscription. I mean, I have no connection to them at all, but our students use it a lot. And I think it's probably going to be more efficient to use something that's already prepared and vetted, and that has explained answers, because that's really the thing, is to learn, to use questions, you're not really using it as an assessment, but as a learning tool, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much for that response. So there's another question about, is there any type of alternative formative assessments that you would recommend for physiology assessment? So I suppose this may be the way in which you actually test the students. What are the different areas, or what are the different methods that you can actually do as a formative assessments?
Formative assessment. Yeah. I mean, I think I don't know. I think practice questions are a great way to individually test, assess where you are. I'm a huge believer in that. Do you all provide practice questions with the courses for the students?
I think it will depend on the university themselves. We don't. We probably provided questions just in a tutorial and problem solving sessions that we have, but we don't actually have a bank that the students can actually access for them to practice as yet. But something to think about. That's a great.
Well, if I'm speaking to the educators, I think it's a great thing to do. And I mean, honestly, in Virginia, we struggle with this too. The students want more of them. We struggle to write, to provide enough. I think it's just always a challenge, but it's a great opportunity too for the faculty to learn how to write better questions. So I think it's something we really are still investing in. We have a sort of an electronic curriculum, and all of this is online now, and it's probably the number one theme in our course reviews is, we need more practice questions. So I think we share the same challenge, but it's really important. The students appreciate it so much. And they don't have to all be multiple choice questions. I mean, the kind of questions you do in problem solving sessions and case-based questions, those are, open-ended questions are really awesome ways to learn.
That's right. There is a lot of interest in actually all this question bank and access to practice questions. I think you kind of triggered them to really think about accessing all those resources. So there's also questions on how can we get access to bank, the question bank in USA. I think it's the online system. It's actually listed in the steps are actually listed in the website itself. Is that right? Can you maybe repeat to the audience about that? The questions that you say was most useful? Is that One World?
The best bank is UWorld.
Oh, UWorld, sorry.
Capital U WORLD for step one.
Okay.
Then there's one, and so step one is preclinical, and it's comprehensive. It's all of the preclinical sciences. Right. And you can, I'm like promoting them. I don't
unintentionally, but
you asked, so I think I'm just giving you my honest opinion, because there are a few competitors out there, and I don't think any of them have the quality of explanation. And I rarely encounter a question where I think they kind of missed the physiology. They usually do a pretty good job. Whoever is put this together are some really smart people who know a lot of science. So I will send you the exact name, also the name of the Robbins question book and the Robbins website, which is WebPath, because that's free. So is that okay if I email it to you and then you, or is that a convenient way to share?
Yeah, sorry, but for interrupting. Yes, I think it'd be very useful, Prof Constanzo. What I think, if we want to reach out to all the other international audience, what we can do is probably we can put up all these resources in the TSFP website, at the tsfpmalaysia.com website, that you are able to actually access. Or we probably will be thinking of actually putting out all the resources there so that you can check it out, and it will be easier to reach out to all the international community, because rather than actually emailing each individual participants, because there's a lot of audience here. But yeah, and there is also.
I'm typing it in the chat now.
Oh, okay, right. There is also, yes, I think one of the audience is also giving a link to the uworld.com. So that's also something that
Oh, somebody
others
got it
can
already.
actually
Good,
see.
perfect.
Yeah,
Um,
wonderful. Thank you. And some of the participants are saying that they are asking what are your thoughts on the YouTube physiology lectures such as Ninja Nerds, Osmosis, and etc. And do you think they can replace textbooks since physiology is all about understanding?
I don't know, because I haven't actually watched any of those, so I really can't comment. I always listen to what my students have to say about them. I know, occasionally, oh, thanks, somebody got the link already, good. Um, I mean, I think it's always just, hazardous to, because you never know if the level is going to be what your professors expect. The only comment I have about videos that I think you got to be careful is that they can take a lot of time, and you get, you're kind of obligated to watch the whole thing because you don't know what's coming next. It's harder to scroll through. It's harder to find just that place that you need for extra support. So I think what I find a lot of our students do, I'm sure, go to third-party resources videos for some subjects, but I always urge them to be kind of selective, be careful. Don't just be watching videos all day long because it's going to take all of your time. And sometimes it's flipping through a book is quicker, to get to the right place. So I think if you're selective and careful about it, and it can be fine. But I really don't know about, the quality of those specific sources.
Sure. So one other question is that the comment is saying that your suggestions for answering MCQ was very helpful, but what are your suggestions to students regarding answering short essay questions? Have you got any thoughts on that?
Same thing.
Same thing, yeah.
Except you don't have the distractors, which is nice. So we do a little bit of short answer and short essay, and I think the students that, well, sometimes they're afraid when they hear we're going to do that because they haven't done it in a while, but actually they're pretty pleased with it because you don't have the extra problem of the distractors distracting you.
Yeah.
You just write down what you know, and it's can be a very good experience. I think you prepare in the same way. Do you think that?
Yeah, that's true.
And multiple choice test taking is its own skill.
Yes. The understanding of the facts, if you actually put it on the short answer questions, it will be the principles is the same, isn't it, in terms of preparing for that? Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so we're getting a few more questions if you just bear with me. And the next questions that people are asking is that how deep should I actually learn physiology? The more I learn it, the more it's very complicated to me, and I'm overwhelmed with things that connected between concepts, and I can get lost sometimes. This is quite a common perceptions or even experience the students are actually facing at the moment. Do you have any thoughts about how much physiology, how deep it is that they have to learn?
Yeah, that's interesting. It's ever changing because now that you're teaching an integrated curriculum, we've started teaching an integrated curriculum a few years ago. No more big physiology course. Physiology is dispersed in the organ systems. It's it integrates the best of all the basic sciences. So we get to do that. And I think the level of physiology is that we expect is lower now. And now that it's integrated with pathophysiology. So I think the complex thinking and pathophysiology is always going to be there, but I think the depth that's expected in physiology is probably not as great as it once was. Do you think that's true, Dr. Alina?
Yeah, we have I think the challenge with integrated curriculum, I'm possibly wanted to ask you the same thing as well, whether there's a system that can be that the students there's a systematic approach that can be adopted for us to actually learn physiology amongst all of the different disciplines. But what you're saying is completely, I can resonate with, because a lot of the students are finding, studying physiology as a discipline, it's a bit challenging when you actually have an integrated curriculum. I don't quite know how to, what is the best advice to actually do, to give them in terms of systematic approach. But I think what you're saying, it applies across the board. What all the practical advices that you actually gave today, it applies, but the only challenge is that with all the overwhelming, informations that you have to deal with other disciplines, you have to also take time to learn physiology. There's no shortcut, I think, towards reading it. So that you're just going to have to make time to integrate physiology with others. So I don't necessarily know what is the correct answer of how best to study physiology in an integrated curriculum. But I think all the principles that you actually mentioned in your talk applies, and they're just going to have to try and find a way of scheduling this studying amongst all the other things that they actually have to deal with. What about in Virginia? Is there any, as a course director of medical physiology, do you sometimes have any advice on the systematic approach that you can actually adopt to, try and learn physiology amongst all the other subjects?
Yeah. I think what's happened, and this is probably more for the educators, but as we moved into the integrated curriculum, what worked the best was that when there was a clinician, which is usually the person teaching the pathophysiology of the system, usually someone from internal medicine, and the person teaching the physiology really work closely together to talk the same language, to really teach off of each other, if that makes sense, and to intentionally reinforce every time we have a chance. But it really takes a mutual respect. If one or the other is just too stubborn to say, I'm not going to compromise the way I explain this physiology, then it's never going to work, And likewise, if the clinical folks are not interested in really integrating the physiology, it's not going to work. So I think the pairing has been the most critical thing. And it's interesting, as we just finished our renal course, and I teach all the renal physiology, and honestly, I'm teaching a little bit less renal physiology than I would have in the past in this integrated course. But I've been working with the clinicians for years. We've been working together for years and teaching together, and we learn from each other. And even after all that experience, we're still having the same conversation. We need to be able to time more together. We need to take more opportunities to say, and remind you of the physiology that underlies this. So, I think it's just going to be it's going to be a continuous process. It's never going to be completely done. We're always going to be trying to make it better. But I think the reward is really great. I think the students learn. I think they ultimately probably learn a lot more about the system's thinking, even if they aren't learning quite as much physiology in quite as much depth. I also teach pulmonary physiology in the pulmonary course. And the course director there, who's she's a critical care doc. That's what she does, is pulmonary critical care, ICU. She said, for once we're teaching, pulmonary pathophysiology, and the students actually know some physiology because they haven't forgotten all of it. They're getting it right now. So I think there's some benefits to the integrated, and it's here to stay. I don't think we'll ever go back to the other way. So and the other thing, Dr. Alina, that I have done a lot more of in this integrated curriculum is I do a lot more reviews of the physiology. So they have the lectures and all that, but do more formal reviews to really kind of make sure it stays in the students' minds, because otherwise, because they're learning so much pathology that it can be drowned out. So that's one thing I'm doing a little bit differently. So I don't know if any of that helps. It sounds like we are kind of confronted with the same challenges, but I think it's really good. I think it's really good for the students in the long run.
Yes.
And good for us because we learn a lot.
Yes, well, I think one of the other approaches is actually to do the problem-based learning, where it integrates all the different disciplines, and usually physiology plays a big part of the understanding the mechanisms of all the symptoms and signs, which are, in those problem-based cases.
Right.
Very good. So we'll just have a quick look, just a couple more questions, and then probably we might actually end the sessions in the interest of time. So a lot of the questions or issues raised here, I believe comes from educators, because they are quite interested actually in applying all the tips that you also gave for the students. So a lot of people are still asking a lot about the questions based. So they would like to hear your thoughts on single best answer questions in physiology, and also what you think of the first 8 USMLE step 1, whether that's actually very relevant for physiology teaching and learning, and also wanting to know whether you can give them some tips on how to teach practical sections or practical classes in physiology, if there's any thoughts on that. So would you like to maybe address those questions about single best answer? And
when I was talking about multiple choice questions, I was talking about single best answer. Okay. That's the only type of multiple choice question that is used in the United States, is single best answer. We don't use other formats because the licensing exam, the national, the step 1, it only uses single best answer. So, writing if this probably as an educator asking the question, the single best answer questions anyway, this is what I learned, is that, the correct answer is over here. It's the directions are always pick the single best answer. The next most correct answer should be, not here, right? Because that's going to be super confusing and people are going to get it wrong and you're going to have to throw out the question. So there should be, the next best answer should have, it might have a little bit of rightness to it, but it's not going to be as right as the best answer. And then you have the other choices, which, kind of are, increasingly wrong. So that's supposed to be a good, kind of construction where the best answer is here, and then you have gradations of wrongness, right? That's my understanding anyway of how to do it. But it's a skill, right? To learn to write good questions that are unambiguous, that are challenging enough, that are not completely obvious. You don't want to have this is the right answer and then 4 wrong choices that are all, just completely wrong. That's not going to be a very good question. We're always looking for discriminating questions that spread the students out, where they're challenging enough. So it's a real skill to write good questions. We have workshops a couple of times a year to train the faculty and retrain the faculty to write good questions. And we like, physiology, we want all the questions to require thinking, not to be recall.
Absolutely. So definitely when we are actually constructing questions, especially single best answer for physiology, there is need to be a training sessions for us to be doing that rather than just blatantly just going through that. So thank you very much. And also, what are your thoughts about the USMLE first aid? Yeah, is that useful?
I don't think for physiology that it's very good. I mean, I'm pretty familiar with it, and first aid is pretty good for memorizations.
Yeah.
Subjects, but physiology being conceptual, there's a lot in there, and if you look at it, you say, oh, there's a lot there, but it's just, just all of these random facts kind of packed in there. There's no explanation. And it's, so I think for physiology, it probably is not harmful, but I think it could take a lot of time, and it's probably not the best resource. Sure. For things like microbiology and pharmacology, where you really have to memorize a lot, it's very useful.
Right. Thank you very much for that thought. So I would just like to read one more question, because I think this comes from a student. The questions: are there any tips on the ways we can read through a chapter or system on physiology textbook for the first time, given that there's a lot of things to take in? So I think this relates to the fact that sometimes, as you mentioned, some textbook can present information in a very great depth, and sometimes it's quite complex and convoluted. Do you have any tips on how the students can decipher all those informations and make it more meaningful for them, so that they can practice this active writing?
Yeah. I mean, it's tough when the book is in great depth. I mean, it's tough because it means you basically have to select, the high points. And when you're a student and you're studying for, the subject for the first time, you may not feel confident in selecting that. So I think the faculty, it's important that the faculty identify, texts that are really at that level, that have enough depth, but that, where the student can really follow the story and read it almost for enjoyment, and get the main ideas without diving into all of the details at once at first. To get that first pass. So I think it's tough if the book itself is just too dense. And I don't know what the example would be of that, of text, the text that you may use that that students, do your students use Robbins for pathology, for example?
I think that it's quite a universal textbook for everyone, right? Yeah. I suppose this is probably the students.
Robbins is very readable, but it's thick, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I guess it's more on trying to actually maybe understand that, have a read through of the chapters, as you said, try to get the key points from those chapters, and then you need to construct your own understanding of what you think about the key concepts. Right. And then you may want to check with your the professors or the lecturers and counter checked when they attend the class to see whether their concepts are actually being reinforced in those lectures. So maybe that's one way of actually approaching a lot of these textbooks, which are quite complicated for them to understand, perhaps.
Right.
Yeah, so wonderful. So this probably these are just the questions that should have been asked. So I think maybe in the interest of time, we should actually just come to the end of the session. And so again, thank you very much for your valuable input, Professor Constanzo. I think it's really been very helpful, all the tips, and I can really think that the students or even the audience actually really can relate to what the experiences and actually take on board all the advice that you mentioned.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful. So essentially, this sessions has come to the end. And we apologize for not being able to address if there's any other questions that that's been missed in this discussion. I think the resources for this particular sessions, we will try to put it up on the TSFP websites after discussions with all the speakers. So do check out the website if you need to actually get more information about some of the key points and also what we've discussed today. And if you have a particular query that is unanswered, I think you may directly contact Prof Constanzo via email. So we will be displaying her email address again at the end of the session. So we've now come to the end of the sessions today. Again, I would like to thank Prof Constanzo for her time and effort in giving such an excellent talk. Many thanks to all the participants for taking time to attend today's sessions. And again, please accept our sincere apology for any shortcomings during the running of today's sessions. We had a bit of a technical issues earlier on, so we've started, actually, there's a delay in the starting of the meeting, so apologize for that. So thank you everyone again, take care, and hope we can see each other in future events.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I enjoyed being with you.